These notes took 6 hours to write, and according to the research, most of them are worthless. And not because the information is wrong, but because the way they were written almost guarantees that the student won't remember them. In fact, studies show that students who write detailed, word-for-word notes remember only about 23% of the content a week later. But students who take notes differently, they retain about 58%. That's more than double. So the question is, what's the difference? Why does one approach lead to long-lasting memory, but the other one just creates the illusion of learning? Today, we're going to be breaking down exactly what the science says about effective note-taking. And this is going to be true for any and all subjects, but for subjects like anatomy, this is going to be especially true because you have hundreds of terms, complex spatial relationships, and just frankly, way more information than the human brain should ever have to memorize. And I'm also going to even show you some techniques that are going to transform your note-taking into something that actually provides understanding. Let's start with what doesn't work, because understanding why it fails will help everything else make sense. When researchers at UCLA studied how students took notes, they found something that is not really going to be all that surprising, but if you're anything like me, it's going to absolutely blow you away. And that's the students that took notes with their laptops wrote about 70% more notes than those who wrote them out by hand. Now, you'd think more notes would mean better learning, but the thing is, when they tested both groups on conceptual understanding, the ones with the handwritten notes performed significantly better. Why? Because the laptop users weren't really learning. They were transcribing. Their notes were more complete, yeah, but cognitive studies show that verbatim note-taking results in what researchers call non-cognitive writing. Your hands move, but your brain isn't fully engaged. Right? Like this, you essentially become a human photocopier. You're just capturing the words, but you're not processing any of their meaning. And this creates something really dangerous. It's the illusion of learning. It feels like the notes are complete, right? It feels like, you captured all that information, but in the end, like almost none of it got converted to long-term memory. And there's a cognitive reason this happens. Your working memory, that mental workspace where you process new information, has a limited capacity. It's about 4 or 5 items, give or take. So during a lecture, you're juggling multiple tasks simultaneously. You're listening, understanding, deciding what to note, and physically writing. If you try to capture every word, you overload the system with the mechanics of transcription, which leaves like no capacity for the thing that actually matters, which is comprehending the material. So if transcription doesn't work, what actually does? Well, the answer comes from what cognitive scientists call the generation effect. The gist of it is the information that you generate yourself, so you're summarizing, paraphrasing, or reorganizing, is remembered far better than the information that you would just passively receive. In one experiment, students who were using generative note-taking, so they were using their own words as they wrote their notes down instead of copying, retained information about 34% more than those who were copying it verbatim. This is why handwriting tends to outperform typing. Writing by hand is slower, but that constraint is actually beneficial. When you can't write fast enough, you're forced to do something that is cognitively powerful. You have to select what matters. You have to transform the information. You have to distill it down. And that mental work, that reformulating, is what we call learning. The notes are essentially just a byproduct. Studies suggest writing 8-word summaries instead of 20-word sentences uses less working memory, so it frees up capacity for actual thinking and understanding. What I'm saying here is that I want you to treat note-taking as a thinking exercise. Your goal is not to record everything, it is to transform it. But for subjects like anatomy, there's an entirely different dimension that most students miss. Just take a look at this description of the brachial plexus in text form. So you got the nerve roots emerge from the vertebrae, C5 through T1, forming trunks, divisions, and cords before branching into terminal nerves. And then here's the same information as a diagram. Now, obviously, you would rather study from the diagram, but this is a really interesting point that we want to linger on for a moment, because say like if we were looking at a course like English, for example, there's obviously going to be spatial techniques that you can use to your advantage to better understand that, or history or something along those lines. But when we're talking about something like anatomy or engineering or something that requires these spatial relationships and how things connect, text alone is not going to work. And I know this sounds obvious. But I have seen this so much where people think and approach it as though if I just read the right words, I'm going to be able to pass the exam. And that's just simply not true. Research shows that students who study anatomy with integrated text and diagram notes significantly outperform those who rely on text alone. And this taps into something called dual coding. When you process information both verbally and visually, you create two memory pathways instead of just one. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're like, Justin, I am not an artist. Well, I'm here to tell you, neither am I. The point is not that you have this beautiful illustration. The point is that you're going through the motions. It's using your motor activity, your motor pathways. You're basically just really locking this down in the brain. So even just like rough shapes are going to do just fine. What matters is that creating a diagram forces you to understand spatial relationships. If you can't draw where a structure sits relative to others, you probably don't understand it yet. And the drawing reveals the gaps in your knowledge. And if you think about it, trying to label that image is kind of like a test in and of itself, because what you're doing is active recall. You're having to jump into the depths of your mind and extract the information and throw it down out there, and it's going to be incredibly powerful. So here's what I want you to do. Next time you're in class and you see a diagram like on screen or up on the board, I want you to try and replicate it yourself. Again, very simply, but just try and replicate it. And that act itself is going to be way more powerful than all the notes you could possibly write in the world combined. But most students sabotage themselves even when their note-taking technique is solid. And this is because of what's called the forgetting curve. You are going to lose most of the information within the first 24 hours unless you do something very specific with it. And that's because most students, once they take their notes, they don't look at them again until right before an exam. And by that point, they're essentially relearning the material from scratch. So all that initial encoding that their brain did is largely lost. Now, what the research shows absolutely blew my mind, because for those students who actually reviewed the material when it was still fresh, right? So that same day, they actually retained information up to 60% more than those who just waited up until the exam to review it, which is, 60%? That is absolutely mind-blowing. Because what this means is that, look, people think studying is, something you do, like down the road. It's really something you need to be doing the day of, like right then and there. So your note-taking strategy needs to have a review built into it. And then what this does, or what this means, is that when you actually have really powerful note-taking strategies with it, it's just going to be a game changer. And one of the most proven note-taking systems is the Cornell system. And this is where you divide your page into 3 different sections. You have a main notes area, then a left-hand cue column, and then a summary section at the bottom. So during the lecture, you're going to write your notes in that main notes area, right? So no surprises. But after class, and this is critical, you need to fill in that cue column with questions and keywords based on those notes. Then you're going to go ahead and write a brief summary of everything in that lecture. The power is in the review. You cover the main notes and use the cue questions to test yourself. What are the branches of the axillary artery? You try to answer from memory, and then you check. For topics with many interrelated concepts, so like maybe the branches of the abdominal aorta, mind mapping is incredibly powerful. So you put the central concept in the middle, and then you branch outward, showing how everything connects. This mirrors how your brain actually organizes information in interconnected webs and not in linear lists. And for memorization heavy content, so say maybe like muscles and their attachments and everything that goes with it. So this is where you're going to want to build out charts. So think like tables. So you have like a whole column of just like muscle names, then origins, insertions, innervation, blood supply. And sure, this is not the sexiest one at all, but what's nice is that you're able to look at everything at once. You're able to get this giant snapshot, and then you're able to chunk it into these useful and meaningful groups. So the big takeaway here is that you want to match your note format to the content type. So diagrams for spatial relationships, or charts for parallel facts, or for complex systems, that's where you're going to want to utilize mind maps. The most successful students are the ones who combine these. I want you to just imagine just how well you're going to understand the information if you are able to have all this diversity in your notes. But the thing is, even the best notes are worthless if you don't know what to do with them. Most students review by just rereading them. They go through their notes passively, maybe highlighting key terms, and it feels productive, but I promise you it's not. The cognitive science on this is incredibly clear. What you want to do is active recall. Again, this is where you are just like reaching into the depths of your mind and pulling the information out. It is so much more effective than passive review. Every time you force yourself to recall something without looking, you strengthen that memory trace. So rereading gives you familiarity, but recall gives you retrieval strength. So when you're reviewing your notes, don't just read them. Cover them up, like sit there and test yourself. Like look at something and be like, just randomly, can I draw this? And then just see what you're able to do, right? There needs to be some kind of intimacy with the material itself and with the notes. So it's not just about, how you're taking those notes down, but it's how you're engaging with them down the line. By the time that exam comes, you're going to have retrieved that information so many times, it's going to be a breeze. It's just going to be another exercise in reaching into your brain and finding the answer. So let's bring this full circle. The difference between students who remember 23% and those who remember 58% is not effort, it's not intelligence, and it's not how many hours they spend studying. It's whether they treat note-taking as just a simple transcription task or not. You want to write things in your own words. You want to make diagrams. You want to review that material when it's fresh. And then you want to test yourself consistently. And if you really want to take this to the next level, then what you're going to do is you're going to space this out. It's called spaced repetition, and it's one of the most proven techniques out there. In fact, this is something we do in all of our quizzes here at KenHub. We're going to ask you a question, and then you're going to see that exact same question later down the road in that same quiz. Not because we feel like you just need to be bludgeoned with it. It's because that is going to be the best way for you to start seeing that information. But we're going to ask it in a slightly different way, and this way it feels new, it feels fresh, but it also feels familiar, and it's just going to reinforce those pathways. When you learn how to take effective notes, you're not going to dread the next lecture anymore because you're going to have all the tools you need to be successful. And at this point, that's really not studying anymore. This is what it takes to become the professional that you want to be.